"Get out of the car," the cop said harshly. Eric Porter stepped out, keeping cool despite feeling angry inside. As the officer searched him roughly, Eric wondered how many others went through this unfair treatment. But this stop was about to blow up in the cop's face. Eric wasn't just some random guy, he ran internal affairs. And he was going to use this moment to shake things up big time in the Sacramento police force. The sun dipped low over Sacramento, casting long shadows across the streets as Eric Porter navigated his way home. The day's work at the Internal Affairs Office had been demanding, filled with tense meetings and difficult decisions. As he drove, Eric's mind wandered to the comfort of home, the promise of a quiet evening ahead providing a welcome respite from the day's challenges. Traffic moved steadily around him, the hum of his sedan's engine a soothing counterpoint to the cacophony of the city. Eric adjusted the air conditioning, the cool air helping to ease the tension from his shoulders. He was lost in thought, contemplating the complexities of his role in maintaining integrity within the police force, when a flash of blue and red in his rearview mirror jolted him back to the present. With practiced calm, Eric signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. He took a deep breath, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel as he watched the patrol car come to a stop behind him. In the fading light, he could make out the silhouette of an officer approaching his vehicle. Officer Bradley Larson stepped up to Eric's window, his face a mask of professional detachment. "License and registration, please," he requested, his tone clipped and businesslike. Eric complied without hesitation, his movements deliberate and unhurried as he retrieved the documents. As Larson examined the paperwork, Eric noticed a subtle shift in the officer's demeanor. Larson's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze flickering between Eric and the license in his hand. The air seemed to thicken with an unspoken tension, a silent undercurrent that belied the routine nature of the stop. "Mr. Porter," Larson began, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before, "do you know why I pulled you over this evening?" The question hung in the air, laden with more than simple curiosity. Eric met Larson's gaze steadily. "No, officer, I'm afraid I don't," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "Was I speeding?" Larson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You were drifting in and out of your lane," he stated, his tone growing more accusatory. "Have you had anything to drink tonight, Mr. Porter?" The question caught Eric off guard, but he didn't let it show. He maintained his composure, recognizing the subtle escalation in Larson's questioning. "No, officer," he responded firmly. "I haven't had anything to drink. I've just finished a long day at work and was heading home." Larson's eyes narrowed further, skepticism evident in his expression. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he commanded, his hand moving to rest on his belt. Eric felt a flicker of frustration, but he kept it carefully hidden beneath his calm exterior. He complied with the officer's request, moving slowly and deliberately as he exited the car. The evening air felt cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the growing tension of the situation. As Eric stood beside his vehicle, Larson's questioning became more pointed and aggressive. The officer's body language shifted, his stance widening as if preparing for confrontation. "Where are you coming from, Mr. Porter?" Larson demanded. "And where are you headed in such a hurry?" Eric took a deep breath, centering himself before responding. "As I mentioned, officer, I'm on my way home from work. I'm not in any particular hurry." His voice remained steady, betraying none of the anger or indignation he felt at the unjustified escalation of the stop. Larson's eyes darted around the interior of Eric's car, his suspicion palpable. "Mind if I take a look inside your vehicle?" he asked, though his tone suggested it was less a request and more a foregone conclusion. Eric's calmness in the face of Larson's mounting hostility seemed to unnerve the officer. Larson's questions became more aggressive, his assumptions more blatant. Yet with each accusatory inquiry, Eric responded with unwavering composure, his answers clear and concise. As the encounter stretched on, the dynamic between the two men shifted subtly. Eric's deliberate calm began to erode Larson's certainty, causing the officer to second-guess his own actions. The air crackled with unspoken tension, both men acutely aware that this was no longer a routine traffic stop. The air crackled with unspoken tension as Officer Larson's demeanor shifted, his initial suspicion morphing into something darker and more insidious. The fading Sacramento twilight cast long shadows across the scene, mirroring the growing unease between the two men. Larson's eyes narrowed, his jaw set in a hard line as he surveyed Eric, searching for any sign of guilt or defiance. "Step out of the vehicle," Larson commanded, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. The words hung in the air, heavy with implied threat. Eric took a deep breath, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He knew his rights, understood the delicate balance of power at play, but he also recognized the potential danger of the situation. With deliberate slowness, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the car door. As Eric emerged from the vehicle, he kept his movements measured and calm. His hands remained visible at all times, a sad necessity born from years of similar encounters. Larson's hand hovered near his holster, a subtle reminder of the power imbalance between them. The officer's eyes darted from Eric to the car and back again, as if expecting contraband to materialize out of thin air. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Larson announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. Eric's heart sank, but he nodded, knowing that protesting would only escalate the situation. As Larson began his invasive search, Eric stood silently by the roadside, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He felt the familiar sting of indignity, the frustration of being judged not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. Larson's search grew increasingly frantic as it yielded nothing to justify his suspicions. He rifled through the glove compartment, checked under the seats, and even popped the trunk. With each passing moment, his movements became more aggressive, his breathing more labored. Eric watched, his face a mask of calm that belied the storm of thoughts within. As the fruitless search continued, Larson's questioning took on a more hostile tone. "Where are you really coming from?" he demanded, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What's in the briefcase?" The questions came rapid fire, each one revealing more about Larson's prejudices than about Eric's supposed transgressions. Eric's responses remained steady and respectful, a stark contrast to Larson's growing agitation. "As I mentioned before, officer, I'm coming from work. My briefcase contains work-related documents." His calm demeanor seemed to further unsettle Larson, whose face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. The encounter teetered on the edge of a more serious confrontation. Larson's body language grew more aggressive, his hand repeatedly brushing against his weapon. "I know you're hiding something," he growled, stepping closer to Eric. "People like you always are." The blatant prejudice in Larson's words hung in the air, a testament to how quickly a routine traffic stop could devolve into discrimination. Eric felt a chill run down his spine, recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. He thought of the countless other drivers who had faced similar treatment, those who didn't have the protection of his position or the composure born from years of navigating such situations. In that moment, Eric made a decision. He would not let this incident pass unnoticed or unchallenged. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not just for himself, but for all those who had suffered similar injustices in silence. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. "Officer Larson," Eric began, his voice calm but firm, "I believe we need to discuss the nature of this stop and your conduct during it." The statement hung in the air, a clear challenge to the officer's authority and assumptions. Larson's eyes widened, surprise momentarily replacing his aggressive demeanor. He hadn't expected this composed, well-spoken man to push back against his intimidation tactics. For a moment, doubt flickered across his face, a crack in the armor of his prejudice. The tension in the air was palpable, as Eric's patience wore thin. Larson's baseless accusations had pushed him to the brink, and he knew it was time to end this charade. With a deep breath, Eric made a decision that would alter the course of the entire encounter. "Officer Larson," Eric began, his voice steady and controlled, "I think it's time we had a real conversation about what's happening here." He slowly reached towards his pocket, feeling the weight of his badge against his fingertips. Larson's hand instinctively moved towards his holster, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The moment hung in the balance, a tightrope walk between resolution and escalation. Eric's movements were deliberate, each motion calculated to avoid any misinterpretation. "I'm going to show you something," he said, his gaze locked on Larson's face. "And I want you to think very carefully about how you've conducted yourself tonight." As Eric produced his credentials, the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. Larson's eyes widened, disbelief etching itself across his features as he took in the significance of what he was seeing. The badge glinted in the fading light, a symbol of authority that neither man had anticipated would make an appearance in this encounter. "I'm Eric Porter, head of internal affairs for the Sacramento Police Department," Eric stated, his words landing like a thunderbolt in the stunned silence. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scene, instantly reversing the power dynamic that had defined their interaction up to this point. Larson's demeanor shifted dramatically, the color draining from his face as the full weight of his actions began to sink in. His earlier bravado evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of uncertainty and fear. The officer who had been so quick to make assumptions and throw around baseless accusations now found himself struggling to form coherent thoughts. Eric's voice remained steady as he addressed Larson, now speaking from a position of unquestionable authority. "Officer Larson, I want you to understand the gravity of what's transpired here tonight. Your conduct has been not just unprofessional, but a blatant abuse of your authority." The psychological impact of this sudden shift in power was evident in Larson's body language. His shoulders slumped and his gaze darted nervously, unable to meet Eric's eyes. The revelation had created a moment of reckoning, forcing Larson to confront his assumptions and biases in a way he clearly hadn't anticipated. "Internal affairs isn't just about investigating individual cases of misconduct," Eric continued, his tone measured but firm. "We're responsible for identifying patterns of behavior that indicate broader cultural problems within the department, and what I've witnessed tonight is deeply troubling." Larson's mouth opened and closed, words failing him as he grappled with the implications of Eric's statement. The officer who had been so confident in his authority just moments ago now seemed small and vulnerable, his previous actions cast in a harsh new light. "This encounter isn't over, Officer Larson," Eric said, his voice carrying the weight of his position. "We'll be reviewing your conduct in detail, and I can assure you that there will be consequences. But more importantly, this incident highlights a need for systemic change within our department." As Eric spoke, the true significance of the encounter began to dawn on both men. For Larson, it was a stark realization of his own biases and the potential repercussions of his actions. For Eric, it was a sobering reminder of the work that still needed to be done to address the deep-rooted issues within law enforcement. "I want you to take some time to reflect on your actions tonight," Eric said, his tone softening slightly. "Think about the assumptions you made, the way you escalated the situation without cause. This is an opportunity for growth, Officer Larson, but it's also a warning. We cannot and will not tolerate this kind of behavior in our department." Eric's words hung in the air, heavy with implications. The head of internal affairs knew this was about more than just one traffic stop gone wrong. As he gazed at Officer Larson's stunned expression, a sobering thought crossed his mind. This encounter could be the key to unlocking a much-needed transformation within the entire department. Taking a deep breath, Eric began to address the deeper issues at play. His voice was calm but firm, each word carefully chosen to pierce through the layers of defensiveness he could see building in Larson's posture. "Officer Larson, I want you to understand something fundamental about our role as law enforcement officers," he began, his eyes never leaving the younger man's face. "The badge we wear doesn't elevate us above the people we serve. Instead, it makes us accountable to every single one of them." Larson's expression flickered between defiance and uncertainty as Eric's words sank in. The seasoned internal affairs officer recognized the internal struggle playing out before him. It was a dance he had seen many times before, the moment when an officer was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth about their own biases and misconduct. "What happened here tonight," Eric continued, gesturing to the space between them, "stopped being about a simple traffic violation a long time ago. Your actions, your assumptions, and your treatment of me as a citizen, these are all symptoms of a much larger problem." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "A problem that affects not just you, but potentially everyone you encounter while wearing that uniform." Larson's jaw clenched, a mix of shame and defensiveness clouding his features. But Eric pressed on, seizing this critical moment to drive his point home. "Fairness and respect aren't just nice ideas, Officer Larson. They're the foundation of effective law enforcement. Without them, we lose the trust of the very communities we've sworn to protect and serve. The night air seemed to grow thicker as Eric's critique laid bare the officer's implicit biases and lack of respect. He watched as Larson's eyes darted away, unable to maintain eye contact. It was a telling sign, the first crack in the armor of justification that officers like Larson often build around themselves. "I want you to take a moment and really think about your actions tonight," Eric said, his tone softening slightly, but losing none of its intensity. "The assumptions you made, the way you escalated the situation without cause, these aren't just personal failings. They're reflections of systemic issues that we, as a department, need to address." Larson's shoulders slumped slightly, the full weight of the situation finally seeming to settle upon him. Eric recognized this moment of vulnerability and pressed forward, determined to use it as a catalyst for change. "This isn't just about you facing disciplinary action, though that will certainly be part of it. This is about recognizing a pattern of behavior that undermines everything we stand for as law enforcement officers." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken tensions and the potential for transformation. Eric could almost see the gears turning in Larson's mind, the slow and painful process of reconciling his actions with the oath he had sworn to uphold. It was a crucial moment, one that could either lead to genuine introspection or further entrenchment in harmful behaviors. "I'll be reviewing your record thoroughly," Eric continued, his voice taking on a note of finality. "But more importantly, this incident will serve as a starting point for a broader examination of our department's practices and culture. Because if this could happen to me, a senior officer with years of experience, I can't help but wonder how many other citizens have faced similar treatment." Larson's face paled at the implications, the realization dawning that his actions tonight had set in motion events that would reach far beyond this single encounter. Eric felt a mix of determination and weariness wash over him. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with resistance and difficult conversations. But he also recognized the vital importance of this moment, a chance to address the rot at the core of their shared profession. "Officer Larson, I want you to understand something," Eric said, his voice taking on a tone of both warning and opportunity. "This interaction we've had tonight, it's a mirror. It reflects not just your personal biases, but larger issues within our department. And it's a mirror we can't afford to look away from any longer." As the first rays of dawn crept through his office blinds, Eric Porter sat motionless, the weight of last night's encounter pressing down on him. The manila folder on his desk seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, its contents about to shatter any illusion of isolated incidents within the department. With a deep breath, Eric opened Officer Larson's file, bracing himself for what he might uncover. The pages before him told a story that went far beyond a single traffic stop. As Eric pored over the records, a pattern emerged, one that sent a chill down his spine. Larson's history was peppered with what the file euphemistically called minor complaints of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, and vague misunderstandings that had never been properly addressed. Each incident, taken alone, might have seemed innocuous, but together they painted a troubling picture of an officer who had been allowed to operate unchecked for far too long. Eric's brow furrowed as he connected the dots between Larson's past behavior and the confrontation from the previous night. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. Larson wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a deeper problem. The words escaped his lips in a whisper, but their impact reverberated through his office. This wasn't just about one officer's misconduct. It was about a system that had failed to recognize and address a pattern of behavior that undermined the very principles of justice they were sworn to uphold. As the morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across his desk, Eric began to contemplate the monumental task ahead. Addressing systemic issues within the force would be like trying to change the course of a river with his bare hands. He knew that any attempt to confront these deeply ingrained problems would face resistance from all sides. From officers who saw nothing wrong with the status quo, to administrators more concerned with public image than genuine reform. Eric leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with the potential consequences of taking a stand. He could already hear the whispers in the hallways, feel the icy stares from colleagues who would see his actions as a betrayal. But as he glanced at the badge sitting on his desk, he was reminded of the oath he had taken to serve and protect not just the public, but the integrity of the force itself. With renewed determination, Eric began to formulate a plan. He knew that simply disciplining Larson wouldn't be enough. This required a complete overhaul, a department-wide review not just of individual officers, but of our training, our protocols, our accountability systems. The words came to him as if he were already presenting his case to the chief, each syllable charged with the urgency of the situation. As he jotted down notes, Eric's mind wandered to the potential fallout. His career, which he had built meticulously over years of dedicated service, could be jeopardized. Colleagues might turn their backs on him, seeing his actions as a threat to their way of life. But the alternative, staying silent in the face of injustice, was unthinkable. Quiet doesn't fix anything. Quiet lets it keep happening, he murmured, the truth of the statement settling heavily on his shoulders. The scope of the task ahead was daunting. Eric knew that true change would require more than just disciplinary action against a few bad apples. It would demand a fundamental shift in the culture of the department, a reimagining of what it meant to wear the badge and serve the community. The real victory, he realized, was not in punishing Larson, it was in preventing the next Larson. As the morning wore on, Eric's resolve strengthened. He began to outline a comprehensive plan for reform, knowing that each word he wrote could potentially spark controversy and pushback. But he also felt a glimmer of hope. If he could make even a small dent in the systemic issues plaguing the department, it could ripple out, affecting not just Sacramento, but potentially inspiring change in police forces across the country. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Chief Daniels' office, casting long shadows across the polished desk. Eric Porter stood outside, his hand poised to knock, the weight of his proposal pressing against his chest. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew would be a challenging conversation. As Eric entered, Chief Daniels' welcoming smile faded, replaced by a furrowed brow. The chief's eyes darted to the folder in Eric's hand, then back to his face, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Eric, what's on your mind?" Daniels asked, gesturing for him to take a seat. Eric settled into the chair, his posture rigid. He recounted the incident with Officer Larson, his words measured but charged with urgency. As he spoke, Chief Daniels' expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed a steady rhythm on the armrest of his chair. "This isn't just about Larson," Eric continued, his voice low and intense. "It's a symptom of a much larger problem within our department. We need to address these issues head-on if we want to regain the trust of our community." Chief Daniels leaned back, his chair creaking softly. "What exactly are you proposing, Eric?" Eric took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "A comprehensive, department-wide review. We need to examine our policies, our training programs, our accountability systems. It's time for a complete overhaul." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air between them. Chief Daniels' expression hardened, his jaw clenching visibly. "Do you understand the implications of what you're suggesting? The potential backlash from the union? The hit to officer morale? The public scrutiny?" Eric nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I do, Chief, but the cost of inaction is far greater. We have a chance to be at the forefront of meaningful change, to set an example for departments across the country." The chief's eyes narrowed. "And what about the fallout? The media circus this could create? We'd be opening ourselves up to criticism from all sides." "With all due respect, Chief," Eric countered, leaning forward, "that criticism is already there. The difference is, now we have a chance to address it proactively on our terms." The discussion intensified, their voices rising and falling as they debated the future of the department. Eric outlined his vision for reform, drawing on successful initiatives from other cities. He spoke of enhanced training programs, community oversight boards, and increased transparency. Chief Daniels listened, his expression unreadable. "You're talking about a complete paradigm shift, Eric. It's not going to be easy. We'll face resistance from within our own ranks." "I know," Eric acknowledged, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "But that's exactly why we need to do this. We can't keep turning a blind eye to the systemic issues plaguing our department. It's time to rebuild trust, to show our community that we're committed to serving and protecting all of them equally." The chief stood, pacing behind his desk. And what about the officers who feel threatened by these changes? The ones who might see this as an attack on their integrity? Eric's response was measured but firm. That's where leadership comes in, Chief. We need to help them understand that this isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about growth, about becoming better at our jobs, about truly living up to the oath we all took. As the meeting drew to a close, an uneasy agreement hung in the air. Chief Daniels hadn't fully committed to Eric's proposal, but he hadn't dismissed it outright either. It was a start, a small crack in the foundation of resistance that Eric knew he would have to slowly, persistently widen. The whispers began as a soft murmur, barely audible above the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards. But as word of Eric Porter's proposed department-wide review spread through the Sacramento Police Department, that murmur grew into a roar. The once solid ground beneath Eric's feet began to shift, and he found himself standing at the edge of a chasm he had inadvertently created. In the days following his meeting with Chief Daniels, Eric felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. Some colleagues offered subtle nods of support, their expressions a mix of hope and apprehension. Others regarded him with thinly veiled hostility, their once friendly greetings replaced by stony silence. The precinct had become a minefield, and Eric navigated it with cautious determination. Anonymous complaints began to appear on Eric's desk, each one a thinly veiled threat disguised as concern for the department's reputation. "We can't afford this kind of scrutiny," one note read. "Some things are better left alone," warned another. The messages were clear: back down or face the consequences. But Eric Porter was not a man easily swayed by intimidation. If anything, the resistance he encountered only strengthened his resolve. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he also understood that true change often came at a personal cost. As he sat in his office, poring over reports and strategizing his next move, Eric felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Recognizing the need for allies in this uphill battle, Eric began to assemble a team of like-minded officers and external experts. He sought out those who had shown a commitment to integrity and a willingness to question the status quo. Detective Sarah Chen, known for her meticulous investigative skills and unwavering ethics, was among the first to join his cause. Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a young patrolman with a passion for community outreach, also stepped forward, eager to be part of positive change. To provide an objective perspective, Eric reached out to Dr. Amelia Lawson, a respected criminologist specializing in police reform. Her expertise would be invaluable in navigating the complex landscape of departmental policies and procedures. Together, they formed the core of what Eric hoped would become a movement for transformation within the Sacramento Police Department. As the review process began, Eric and his team were met with a mix of reluctance and outright obstruction. Some officers dragged their feet, providing incomplete information or conveniently misplacing requested documents. Others attempted to discredit the process, spreading rumors and sowing seeds of doubt among their colleagues. Eric found himself walking a tightrope, balancing the need for decisive action with the importance of maintaining trust within the department. He knew that pushing too hard could alienate potential allies, while moving too slowly might allow the momentum for change to dissipate. It was a delicate dance, one that required all of his skills as a leader and negotiator. In the midst of this struggle, unexpected allies emerged from the shadows. Sergeant Tom Reeves, a grizzled veteran nearing retirement, approached Eric one evening as he was leaving the precinct. "I've seen a lot in my years on the force," Reeves said, his voice low and gravelly. "Some good, some bad. What you're doing here, it's long overdue. You've got my support for what it's worth." These moments of support, however fleeting, provided Eric with the fuel he needed to press on. He began to see small victories amidst the challenges. A training session on implicit bias, once met with eye rolls and skepticism, now sparked thoughtful discussions among officers. Community members, hearing of Eric's efforts, reached out to offer their perspectives and experiences, creating a bridge between law enforcement and the public they served. Yet for every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. Eric's inbox filled with anonymous complaints, each one a stark reminder of the resistance he faced. Whispered threats echoed through the hallways, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, his every move scrutinized by those who opposed change. The pressure began to take its toll. Eric found himself working late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Dark circles formed under his eyes and the lines on his face seemed to deepen with each passing day. But even as fatigue set in, his resolve remained unshaken. In a moment of quiet reflection, Eric stood by the window of his office, gazing out at the city he had sworn to protect. He thought about the incident with Officer Larson, about the countless citizens who may have faced similar treatment. He thought about the officers who joined the force with genuine intentions to serve and protect, only to be shaped by a system that sometimes forgot its true purpose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city as Eric Porter made his way to the precinct. Today was the day of Officer Larson's hearing, and the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. As he walked through the familiar corridors, Eric could feel the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one officer's misconduct, it was a pivotal moment that could reshape the entire department. Eric entered the hearing room, his eyes scanning the faces of those already present. The panel members sat with stern expressions, their postures rigid with the gravity of their task. In the corner, Officer Larson fidgeted in his chair, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to radiate through the room. Their eyes met briefly, and Eric saw a flicker of defiance mixed with fear in Larson's gaze. As the proceedings began, the room fell into a tense silence. The panel chairperson's voice, steady and authoritative, laid out the details of the traffic stop incident. Eric listened intently, his mind replaying that night with crystal clarity. He watched as Larson's demeanor fluctuated between defiance and uncertainty, the officer's jaw clenching as each piece of evidence was presented. Witnesses were called, their testimonies painting a troubling picture. It wasn't just about that one night. A pattern of behavior began to emerge. Officers who had worked alongside Larson spoke of his aggressive tactics, his tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily. Community members recounted similar experiences, their voices tinged with a mix of anger and relief at finally being heard. When it was Eric's turn to testify, he stood, his posture straight and his voice unwavering. He spoke not just of the incident, but of the broader implications. What happened that night, Eric said, his words measured but impactful, is a symptom of a deeper issue within our department. It's about more than one officer's actions. It's about the culture that allows such behavior to persist. As Eric continued, he could feel the weight of his words settling over the room. He spoke of the need for accountability, for a reevaluation of training and protocols. We have a responsibility, he emphasized, not just to punish misconduct, but to prevent it, to create a department that truly serves and protects all members of our community. The panel listened intently, their expressions unreadable. Eric knew that his words were pushing boundaries, challenging long-held beliefs and practices. But he also knew that this moment demanded nothing less than complete honesty and a commitment to change. As the hearing progressed, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. Larson's attorney attempted to downplay the incident, arguing that it was an isolated occurrence blown out of proportion. But the evidence spoke for itself, and Eric could see the panel members' expressions hardening as they pieced together the full extent of Larson's misconduct. Finally, after hours of testimony and deliberation, the panel reached their decision. The room held its collective breath as the chairperson stood to deliver the verdict. Officer Bradley Larson, she began, her voice firm and clear. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony given, this panel has determined that your actions constitute a serious breach of conduct and a violation of department policy. Eric watched as the color drained from Larson's face. The officer's shoulders slumped as the chairperson continued, outlining the disciplinary actions. A suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and a probationary period upon return to duty. It was a significant punishment, one that sent a clear message about the department's stance on such behavior. As the hearing concluded, Eric felt a mix of emotions wash over him. There was relief, certainly, that Larson was being held accountable, but there was also a renewed determination. This hearing was just the beginning, a first step in the long journey towards real, lasting change within the department. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as Eric Porter took his place at the podium. The crowd before him was a mosaic of faces, each etched with a mix of hope and skepticism. As he adjusted the microphone, Eric's gaze swept across the room, taking in the diversity of the audience. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a crucial step in rebuilding the fractured relationship between the police and the community they served. Eric cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began to speak. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know many of you are here because you've lost faith in our department, and I want you to know that I hear you. We've made mistakes, and it's time we own up to them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward, intrigued by his candor, while others crossed their arms, their expressions guarded. Eric continued, his words measured but sincere. We're here tonight to start a new chapter, one where your voices are not just heard, but are an integral part of how we move forward. As Eric outlined the changes being implemented within the department, he could feel the tension in the room begin to shift. He spoke of increased transparency, regular community forums, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. We're not just talking about change, he emphasized, his eyes meeting those of a skeptical woman in the front row. We're putting it into action. The Q&A session that followed was intense. Hands shot up across the room, and Eric braced himself for the onslaught of tough questions. A middle-aged man stood up, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. How can we trust you when your officers still profile us? When our kids are afraid to walk down the street? Eric didn't shy away from the hard truths. You're right to be angry, he acknowledged. We've broken your trust, and we need to earn it back. That's why we're implementing new training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. But more importantly, we're opening up our data on stops, arrests, and use of force for public scrutiny. As the evening progressed, the tone of the meeting began to shift. The initial hostility gave way to a cautious willingness to engage. Eric found himself in deep conversations about community-led initiatives and neighborhood watch programs. He listened intently as residents shared their ideas for improving police-community relations. One woman, her voice soft but determined, suggested regular coffee meetups between officers and residents. It's harder to mistrust someone when you know their story, she said. Eric nodded, making a mental note to incorporate this idea into their engagement strategy. As the meeting drew to a close, Eric felt a glimmer of hope. The room was no longer divided into us and them. Instead, there was a palpable sense of collaboration, a shared determination to forge a new path forward. In his closing remarks, Eric emphasized the importance of ongoing dialogue. This isn't a one-time fix, he said. It's the beginning of a long journey. We're committed to regular forums like this one, where we can continue to listen, learn, and grow together. As people filed out of the community center, Eric overheard snippets of conversation. There was still skepticism, to be sure, but it was tempered with a newfound willingness to give the department a chance. He knew they had a long road ahead, but tonight had been a crucial first step. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as Eric Porter took his place at the podium. This time, however, his audience wasn't a room full of concerned citizens, but a sea of blue uniforms. The atmosphere crackled with tension as officers shifted in their seats, some with arms crossed defensively, others leaning forward with curiosity. Eric cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the room. I know many of you are wondering why you're here today, he began, his voice steady but tinged with determination. We're about to embark on a journey together, one that might be uncomfortable at times, but is absolutely necessary for the future of our department and our community. He introduced the new training program, emphasizing its focus on bias awareness and cultural sensitivity. As he spoke, Eric could feel the resistance emanating from certain corners of the room. Officer Ramirez, a veteran of 20 years, scoffed audibly. Younger officers like Johnson and Chen exchanged skeptical glances. Undeterred, Eric pressed on. He shared a personal story from his early days on the force, recounting a traffic stop where he'd made assumptions about a driver based solely on appearance. The honesty in his voice seemed to capture the attention of even the most resistant officers. I thought I was being a good cop, Eric admitted, his expression somber. But looking back, I realize how close I came to making a grave mistake. It's these moments, These split-second decisions based on unconscious biases that can erode the trust between us and the community we've sworn to protect. As Eric's words hung in the air, the room fell silent. He could see the wheels turning in the minds of his colleagues, some nodding in recognition, others still grappling with defensive thoughts. The training sessions shifted into role-playing exercises. Officers were paired up, asked to step into the shoes of community members from various backgrounds. The scenarios were carefully crafted to reveal ingrained behaviors and assumptions. Officer Ramirez, playing the role of a young black man being questioned about a robbery, found himself struggling to maintain his composure as his partner's questioning grew increasingly aggressive. The realization dawning on his face was palpable. Discussions following each exercise grew heated. Officer Johnson, his face flushed, argued that profiling was sometimes necessary for effective policing. Eric listened patiently before responding. But at what cost? How many innocent people suffer? How much trust do we lose? As the day wore on, Eric could see subtle shifts in perspective emerging. Officer Chen approached him during a break, her eyes wide with a newfound understanding. I never realized how much my own experiences were coloring my interactions, she admitted quietly. Eric emphasized that change was a process, requiring ongoing effort and self-reflection. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame, he explained. It's about recognizing our blind spots and working together to overcome them. The implementation of new training programs to address bias and improve community relations was met with a mix of enthusiasm and lingering skepticism. Eric knew that true transformation would take time, but he was heartened by the conversations he overheard as officers filed out of the room. Officer Ramirez lingered behind, his usual bravado replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Porter," he called out, his voice gruff but sincere. "I've got to admit, I came in here thinking this was a waste of time, but you've given me a lot to think about." Eric nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's all I can ask for, Ramirez, that we all start thinking differently." As the last of the officers trickled out, Eric found himself alone in the now quiet room. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day's events settle on his shoulders. The session had been challenging, at times even contentious, but it was a crucial first step in a long journey. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Eric Porter's office, as he sat surrounded by towering stacks of policy documents and reports. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, a constant reminder of the monumental task that lay before him. With a deep breath, Eric reached for the first document, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the paper, as he began the painstaking process of reviewing and revising departmental policies. Each line of text demanded careful consideration. Eric's pen hovered over the pages, making precise annotations and corrections. He found himself constantly balancing the need for officer safety with the imperative of rebuilding community trust. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, but Eric knew that every revision had the potential to shape the future of policing in Sacramento. As the night wore on, Eric's office became a hub of activity. Legal experts and community leaders filtered in and out, their voices blending into a continuous hum of discussion and debate. Eric listened intently, absorbing their perspectives and incorporating their insights into the evolving policies. He recognized that true reform required a collective effort, drawing upon diverse experiences and expertise. One particular meeting stood out in Eric's mind. Sarah Chen, a respected civil rights attorney, leaned across his desk, her eyes intense as she spoke. "These policies need teeth, Eric. We can't just pay lip service to accountability." Eric nodded, scribbling notes as Sarah outlined potential measures to ensure officers adhered to the new standards. Her words echoed in his mind as he drafted new accountability protocols, knowing they would face significant pushback from the officers' union. As if on cue, the union representatives arrived the following day, their faces etched with concern and skepticism. Eric steeled himself for a difficult conversation. "We understand the need for change," the lead representative began, his tone measured, "but these new measures could leave our officers vulnerable." Eric listened patiently, acknowledging their concerns while standing firm on the necessity of reform. The meeting stretched for hours, a delicate dance of negotiation and compromise. Navigating the complex web of regulations and resistance proved to be Eric's greatest challenge. Each step forward seemed to reveal new obstacles, from legal constraints to deeply ingrained departmental culture. There were moments when Eric felt overwhelmed, questioning whether true change was possible. But then he would remember the faces of community members at recent forums, their hope and cautious optimism fueling his resolve. Slowly but surely, the revised policies began to take shape. Eric's vision for a more transparent and accountable police force emerged from the countless revisions and heated debates. He incorporated clear guidelines for the use of body-worn cameras, established a robust community oversight board, and outlined stringent protocols for reviewing officer conduct. Each addition felt like a small victory in the larger battle for reform. The day finally arrived for Eric to present the changes to Chief Daniels. As he laid out the comprehensive overhaul, Eric's voice rang with conviction. "Chief, I know these changes will face resistance," he said, meeting Daniels's gaze, "but they're necessary if we want to rebuild trust and truly serve our community." Eric walked the chief through each major revision, emphasizing how they addressed the systemic issues that had plagued the department for years. Chief Daniels listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When Eric finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Finally, the chief spoke. "This is a lot to digest, Eric, but I can't deny the need for change. You've done good work here." With those words, a wave of relief washed over Eric. The battle wasn't over, but a crucial victory had been won. In the weeks that followed, the new policies were carefully rolled out across the department. Eric watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as officers grappled with the changes. There were grumbles of discontent and pockets of resistance, but also moments of genuine engagement and understanding. Eric knew that true reform would be a slow process, requiring patience and persistence. The air in Eric Porter's office felt heavy with anticipation as he stared at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. News of Sacramento's police reforms had spread beyond the city limits, igniting a spark of hope and curiosity in departments across the nation. Eric's inbox was flooded with emails from chiefs and officers seeking guidance on implementing similar changes in their own precincts. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, a mixture of pride and apprehension coursing through him. As Eric scrolled through the messages, a particular invitation caught his eye. The National Conference on Police Reform wanted him to be a keynote speaker, sharing Sacramento's journey towards accountability and change. His heart raced at the prospect of addressing hundreds of law enforcement professionals, knowing that his words could potentially shape the future of policing across the country. The days leading up to the conference were a whirlwind of preparation and media attention. Journalists from major networks descended upon Sacramento, their cameras and microphones hungry for sound bites about the department's transformation. Eric found himself thrust into the spotlight, his face plastered across news channels and social media feeds. The attention was both exhilarating and overwhelming, as supporters praised his courage while critics questioned the effectiveness of his reforms. Standing at the podium, Eric took a deep breath and surveyed the sea of faces before him. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation, a mix of skepticism and hope palpable in the air. He began his speech, his voice steady as he recounted the incident that had sparked Sacramento's journey towards change. The room fell silent as Eric shared the painful truths he had uncovered about bias within his own department. As Eric delved into the specifics of Sacramento's reforms, he could see the wheels turning in the minds of his fellow officers. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. He emphasized the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths and the power of individual actions in creating systemic change. What began as a local initiative in Sacramento has the potential to reshape law enforcement across the nation, Eric said, his words resonating through the hall. Each of us has the power to be a catalyst for change, to challenge the status quo and build a system that truly serves and protects all members of our communities. The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact of Eric's words. As he stepped down from the stage, he was immediately surrounded by officers eager to learn more about Sacramento's approach. The conversations that followed were intense and thought-provoking, lasting well into the night. Back in Sacramento, Eric found himself at the center of a media storm. News vans lined the streets outside the police department, reporters clamoring for interviews and updates on the reforms. The increased scrutiny brought both support and criticism, intensifying the pressure on Eric and his team to deliver results. Late one evening, as Eric pored over the latest data on officer conduct, he received a call from a police chief in a small Midwestern town. The chief's voice crackled with emotion as he described how Sacramento's story had inspired him to implement similar changes in his own department. Eric listened intently, offering words of encouragement and practical advice. As the weeks passed, more success stories trickled in from departments across the country. Sacramento's reforms had become a case study, a blueprint for change that others could adapt and implement. Eric found himself fielding calls and emails at all hours, his expertise in high demand as more and more departments sought to address their own systemic issues. The potential for nationwide change became increasingly apparent, both exciting and daunting. Eric knew that true transformation would require sustained effort and commitment from law enforcement agencies across the country. As he reflected on the unexpected reach of his actions, he felt the weight of responsibility more keenly than ever before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Sacramento skyline, Eric stood at his office window, lost in thought. The city stretched out before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows. He thought about the countless lives that could be impacted by the changes rippling out from Sacramento, the potential for a fairer and more just system of law enforcement. As night settled over Sacramento, Eric Porter stood at his office window, the weight of his recent battles etched into the lines of his face. The city lights flickered below, a stark contrast to the shadows that seemed to lurk in every corner of his mind. He turned away from the view, his eyes falling on the mountain of paperwork scattered across his desk, a testament to the relentless fight for reform he had undertaken. Eric sank into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had become his constant companion. The past months had been a whirlwind of confrontations, late nights, and difficult decisions. Each step forward in reforming the department felt like wading through quicksand, with resistance coming from all sides. His thoughts drifted to the countless meetings where he'd faced skepticism and outright hostility. The memory of a particularly heated exchange with a veteran officer surfaced, the man's words still ringing in his ears. "You're tearing this department apart, Porter. We protect our own." Eric had stood his ground, but the accusation had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Then there were the sleepless nights, tossing and turning as he replayed every decision, every confrontation. The strain had begun to show in his personal life. Missed dinners, canceled plans, the growing distance between him and loved ones who couldn't fully understand the burden he carried. Eric's gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, a reminder of simpler times. He picked it up, tracing the smiling faces with his finger. "Is it worth it?" he whispered to the empty room. The question that had been gnawing at him for weeks finally voiced aloud. The progress they'd made seemed so small in the face of the monumental task ahead. Was he tilting at windmills, fighting a battle that could never truly be won? A soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. Eric quickly composed himself, straightening in his chair. "Come in," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. The door opened to reveal Maria Gonzalez, a community activist he'd met at several town hall meetings. Her presence was unexpected, especially at this late hour. "Mr. Porter," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "I hope I'm not interrupting. I saw the light on and took a chance." Eric gestured for her to take a seat, curiosity replacing his earlier melancholy. "What can I do for you, Ms. Gonzalez?" Maria sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wanted to share something with you," she began. "Yesterday my son was pulled over by one of your officers." Eric tensed, bracing himself for another complaint, another setback. But Maria's next words caught him off guard. "The officer was respectful, explained everything clearly, and even helped my son fix the taillight that was out." Eric leaned forward, his interest piqued. Maria continued, her voice growing more animated. "My son said he felt treated like a person, not a suspect. He even mentioned the officer talked about some new training they'd had on community relations." As Maria spoke, Eric felt a familiar spark igniting within him. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was tangible proof that their efforts were making a difference. The reforms, the endless meetings, the sleepless nights, they were slowly but surely changing the fabric of the department. Maria's story acted as a balm to Eric's weary spirit. He listened intently as she shared her hopes for continued improvement in police-community relations. Her words served as a powerful reminder of why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. After Maria left, Eric turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him in the darkened glass. The doubt that had clouded his mind earlier began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but every small step forward was a victory worth celebrating. He gathered his things, ready to head home for the night. As he switched off the office light, Eric felt a surge of determination. The personal cost had been high, but moments like these, real, tangible changes in the lives of the community he served, made it all worthwhile. The evening sun cast long shadows across the community center as Eric Porter stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping over the diverse audience before him. Officers in crisp uniforms sat shoulder to shoulder with community members, their faces a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of hope tinged with the lingering echoes of past struggles. Eric took a deep breath, his hands resting lightly on the edges of the podium. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. As he looked out at the sea of faces, he saw the reflection of countless conversations, heated debates, and moments of unexpected understanding. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear. "6 months ago, we stood at a crossroads. Today, we gathered to reflect on how far we've come and to chart the course ahead." Eric paused, allowing his words to settle over the room. The journey of reform is not a sprint, but a marathon. And while we've made significant strides, our work is far from over. A murmur rippled through the audience, heads nodding in agreement. Eric continued, his tone becoming more passionate. "We've seen a 20% increase in public trust over these past months. That's not just a number, it's a testament to the dedication of every officer who's embraced our new training initiatives and to every community member who's given us a chance to earn back your confidence." He gestured to a group of officers in the front row, their faces a mix of pride and resolve. "Our cultural sensitivity training has led to a 25% reduction in incidents of racial profiling and bias-related complaints. Officers, you've shown that change is possible when we open our hearts and minds to the experiences of those we serve." A woman in the audience raised her hand, and Eric nodded, encouraging her to speak. "That's great," she said, her voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "But how do we know these changes will last?" Eric smiled, appreciating the candor of the question. "An excellent point," he replied. "Sustainability is key. That's why we've established regular community forums and feedback mechanisms. In fact, departments that have implemented similar oversight measures have seen a 40% decrease in misconduct reports over time." He paused, allowing the information to sink in. "But numbers only tell part of the story. The real measure of our success lies in the everyday interactions between officers and citizens. It's in the traffic stop that ends with a handshake instead of handcuffs. It's in the community outreach programs where officers and residents work side by side to build a safer neighborhood." Eric's gaze swept the room, making eye contact with both officers and community members. "This work has not been easy. We've faced resistance, skepticism, and moments of doubt. But we've also witnessed incredible acts of courage, compassion, and change." He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "As we move forward, transparency and accountability remain our guiding principles. We're integrating community members into oversight roles to ensure our practices align with your expectations. This isn't just about policing, it's about building a system of justice that serves everyone equally." The room fell silent, hanging on Eric's every word. "The next phase of our reforms will focus on deepening our community engagement. We'll be expanding our youth mentorship programs, creating more opportunities for positive interactions between officers and residents, and investing in de-escalation training that emphasizes empathy and communication." Eric's expression softened as he continued. "I want to acknowledge the toll this process has taken on everyone involved. Change is never easy, and it often comes at a personal cost. To the officers who've embraced these reforms, despite initial reservations, I commend your professionalism and dedication to growth. To the community members who've shown up time and time again, sharing your experiences and holding us accountable, your persistence is the driving force behind our progress. As he neared the end of his speech, Eric's voice took on a note of urgency. But our work is far from finished. The path of reform requires constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt. We must continue to evaluate our policies, to listen to each other, and to strive for a level of policing that truly serves and protects all members of our community. He straightened his shoulders, his gaze intense. I stand before you today not just as the head of internal affairs, but as a member of this community. The changes we've implemented aren't just about improving our department. They're about building a safer, more just society for all of us. This is a shared responsibility, and it will take all of us working together to create lasting change. Eric's voice rose with passion as he delivered his final words. Let us move forward with determination, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The road ahead may be long, but together we can build a model of policing that serves as a beacon of hope for departments across the nation. Thank you. Eric Porter's journey from witness to catalyst for change had been a testament to the power of individual action in the face of systemic injustice. As he stood at the podium, addressing a room filled with both officers and community members, he felt the weight of the past months pressing down on him. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of possibility hanging in the balance. Our work is far from over, Eric began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. What we've accomplished here in Sacramento is just the beginning. True reform isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey that requires unwavering commitment and constant vigilance. He paused, scanning the faces before him. Some nodded in agreement, while others wore expressions of uncertainty. Eric knew that change was never easy, but he also knew that it was necessary. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he was determined to see it through. Each of us has the power to make a difference, he continued, his words carrying the weight of hard-won experience. Whether you wear a badge or not, we all have a responsibility to recognize and challenge injustice wherever we see it. It's not enough to simply acknowledge the problem. We must actively work towards solutions. As Eric concluded his speech, a hushed silence fell over the room. The impact of his words lingered, sparking conversations and igniting a renewed sense of purpose in those present. The story of Sacramento's police reform had become more than just a local tale. It had become a beacon of hope for communities across the nation, a reminder that change was possible when people dared to stand up and demand it.